If you think that in America, the most powerful country in the world, no city could ever vanish, then you're about to be surprised. Not because of war, not because of sudden natural disasters, but due to a slow-motion collapse, without gunfire, without bloodshed, yet more brutal than anything else. Climate change, economic decline, mass migration. Let me take you through 10 cities now standing on the edge of vanishing before 2030. Some will sink beneath the waves, some will become ghost towns, and some will only remain in memory. 1. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans is a vivid example of how a city can surrender to fate, not because nature is too strong, but because people are too complacent. Sitting below sea level, on soft land sinking about 2 inches per year, New Orleans is like a bowl with a hole in the bottom. But instead of patching the hole, we just label it at risk and keep pouring water in. People often mention Hurricane Katrina as a natural tragedy, but the truth is, Katrina didn't kill New Orleans. Delay, lack of vision, and political division did. The levee system, once praised as an engineering feat, is now old, patched, and incapable of withstanding the megastorms of a new century. The next storm, even without a name yet, doesn't have to be stronger than Katrina. It just needs to hit at the right time, in the right place, and it will expose the truth. This city was never saved, only temporarily spared. The scary part isn't that New Orleans could drown, it's that no one seems to have the courage to admit it and act. When a city is threatened by fate, it needs visionary leaders, not politicians busy campaigning. But that didn't happen. And so, if New Orleans dies, it won't be from nature's punch, but from the quiet death of unpreparedness, a slow retreat, unannounced, from the map of America's livable cities. And when it happens, there will be no panic. People will shake their heads, then look away, as if it was obvious all along. But not me. I believe we've known this for a long time. We just didn't have the courage to face it and fix it. New Orleans didn't die from a storm. It died because we weren't ready. And that death is scarier than any hurricane. 2. Miami, Florida. Miami. Just hearing the name brings sunshine, beaches, high-rises along the ocean, as if the whole city was born to live with the sea. But it's that very sea now slowly swallowing it. Miami isn't collapsing from any single storm, nor from any sudden catastrophe. This city is slowly dying from something even more terrifying: silent saltwater intrusion. When the ocean doesn't crash onto the shore, but seeps quietly into the groundwater beneath, causing the city's foundations to rot from the inside out. Every year, the cost to maintain its drainage and pumping systems rises, already exceeding $3 billion. But that's just a way to buy time. The real danger isn't the beach disappearing, it's that the beach remains. But no one dares live near it. Upscale neighborhoods, once proud of their ocean views, have now become liabilities in insurance portfolios. Rising saltwater not only corrodes infrastructure, but also erodes the faith of those who once believed this was a place to invest, to retire, to live the American dream. But dreams don't last long when the ground beneath them is being hollowed out by the sea. Miami is a textbook case of what happens when development comes without long-term vision. They built skyscrapers. They funneled billions into real estate. They lured the world with sunshine smiles. But no one told the truth. The ground is weakening by the day, and someday, just a mild king tide could be enough to shut down an entire neighborhood with flooding. When that day comes, Miami won't vanish in a headline-making disaster. It'll dissolve like a beautiful bubble, dazzling, but fragile, and the last people to leave may not flee. They simply won't return, an absence strong enough to erase a city from the economic map, from the investor's radar, and eventually from the nation's memory. Miami wasn't killed by the sea, it was killed by neglect, and in every disaster, neglect is always the quietest, but deadliest killer. 3. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit, a name that once meant the American industrial dream, now echoes as a belated warning. This city was once a source of pride, where all roads led to car factories, where the middle class was born, raised, and believed that hard work could lead to material heaven. But when production lines slowed, when investors pulled out, and when globalization sent jobs to cheaper, faster places, Detroit, once the engine, became the abandoned car shell by the roadside. Detroit's downfall didn't happen overnight. It was decades of rot, starting with bad policies, corrupt leadership, and especially complacency. When people thought a glorious past was an unbreakable shield, the city has lost over 60% of its population since its peak. Over 70,000 houses sit abandoned. No upkeep, no watchful eyes, becoming breeding grounds for crime, despair, and a sorrow no one wants to face. People talk about the Detroit comeback like a lifeline of hope, but the truth is, a city can't return with just a few art projects or a symbolic tech hub. When the infrastructure is decayed, when the young have left for good, when trust has rotted to the core, then every comeback is just PR. Detroit doesn't need saving through slogans. It needs the courage to tear down what's rotted and rebuild from scratch. But who has that kind of courage? The government's too busy slashing budgets, businesses are chasing easier profits elsewhere, and the people, they've lived in the dark so long, they no longer recognize light when it appears. And so, Detroit, though still on the map, is disappearing in the most horrifying way. Not through physical collapse, but by fading from America's mind, and a death by forgetting is always the bitterest kind. 4. Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas, the city of lights, of shimmering illusions in the desert, of games where players believe they're winning. But in reality, Las Vegas has lost the most essential thing any city needs to survive: water. While people flock here to feel like they're living beyond limits, the real limit, the water level at Lake Mead, is dropping every single day. This lake was once the city's primary water source, but now the cracks on the lake bed aren't just natural marks. They're undeniable warnings that Las Vegas has borrowed too much from nature without paying it back. Temperatures here are rising steadily with each summer. Climate models show that days above 113 degrees will soon become the new normal. So how long can a city that consumes millions of gallons of water daily, just for cooling, landscaping, and running casinos, actually last? People stay optimistic because the money still flows, the tourists still come, the lights still blaze through the night. But Las Vegas is an illusion, propped up in the desert by pipes, wires, and belief. And once any one of those three breaks, everything collapses faster than any gambler ever has. No one wants to believe a city can die of thirst, especially not one that looks like it never sleeps. But death by thirst doesn't come like a fire. It comes as a slow drying out, cracking the very foundations, bleaching the color from dreams. And then one day Las Vegas won't burn, won't be bombed, won't be wiped off the map. It'll simply be a place no one wants to go anymore. No more water, no more luxury, no more laughter beneath neon lights. When that day comes, the last light in Las Vegas won't be from a bulb. It'll be the truth, that this city once hit the jackpot, but bet everything on the one thing that can't be faked: resources. And in that gamble, nature is always the house. 5. San Francisco, California. San Francisco, the city of fog, of tech, of iconic bridges, is standing on a fault line, both literally and metaphorically. The literal crack is named San Andreas, a fault geologists have warned about for decades, where one well-timed earthquake could wipe out the city's entire infrastructure. But scarier still is the social fracture, where trust between classes, between those who stay and those forced to leave, is crumbling every day. The cost of living has skyrocketed beyond reason, to the point where even those in tech, supposedly the new elite, are starting to back away. Tiny apartments cost millions, while bus stops, parks, even the front steps of major companies have become shelter for thousands of unhoused people. The division isn't metaphorical anymore. It's plain to see between the shiny glass towers and the flimsy tents on the sidewalk. People once believed tech would save San Francisco, turn it into the brain capital of the world. But that very tech also sent real estate prices through the roof, unraveling every traditional layer of society. This city feels like a broken operating system, updating too fast without patching fundamental bugs. And when we talk about the future, San Francisco doesn't just face geological threats. It faces a reverse migration, where startups move to Austin, Seattle, or even suburban Denver, where young people no longer dream of arriving, but only hope to earn enough to leave. This is no longer the California dream. It's a never-ending fever of a city that once ruled the world and could fall off the global influence map quietly, swiftly. San Francisco won't sink like Venice, won't dry out like Las Vegas, won't be abandoned like Detroit. It will collapse from its own logic. Too smart to see it's being foolish, too rich to notice it's losing its soul. And that, sometimes, is the most terrifying kind of extinction. 6. Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix, a city born in the heart of the desert, where people believed they'd conquered nature with concrete, air conditioning, and the grit of American willpower. But that victory was only temporary. Phoenix isn't threatened by water. It never had much to begin with. It isn't threatened by the sea. It's buried deep inland. But that, in itself, is the problem. In an age of climate chaos where heat becomes a silent killer, Phoenix is entering an era where life isn't quite livable. But death hasn't come yet either. This city is experiencing longer, harsher summers, with hundreds of days each year above 110 degrees. The air is dry, the sky blazes, the pavement gets hot enough to melt shoe soles, creating an environment where even AC can't save you. When the power grid strains, when the water systems begin fighting over distant supplies, Phoenix reveals itself for what it is: an artificial oasis people can no longer afford to maintain. Residents aren't evacuating like in disaster movies. They're slipping away quietly, family by family, in search of somewhere cooler to breathe. Hospitals report soaring rates of heat stroke. Trees wither, shade becomes as precious as gold, and those who remain, often the elderly, the poor, or those with no way out, live inside a giant oven, cooled only temporarily by their own wallets. Officials try to reassure with community cooling programs, but no one dares say the truth. Phoenix may no longer be a livable city in a few decades, and if its death does come, it won't be a dramatic explosion or collapse. It'll come as a cold line in a scientific report, a quiet data point in a census chart, a missing feeling in the hearts of those who once called it home. And then, people will call Phoenix by the name it's known throughout Roman history, not a reborn firebird, but a dream that burned itself alive. 7. Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston, the old world gem of the American South, where cobblestone streets curl past antebellum homes, where past and present once lived in quiet harmony. But it's that very beauty, that charm, that makes Charleston more vulnerable than any modern city. This isn't a city built for the future. It's a place preserved for memory, and memory can't stand against the ocean. Every year, the number of tidal flood days increases. The sight of cars splashing through flooded historic streets is no longer unusual. It's routine. Worse yet, the water isn't just coming from the sea. It's rising from below. Groundwater pushing up, ancient drainage systems failing. Experts have warned, Charleston is sinking, millimeter by millimeter, and no plan is fast enough to stop it. Yet weddings still happen on the pier, artisan shops still open, flower festivals still go on. On the surface, Charleston remains a romantic painting, but look closely and the brushstrokes are blurring in salt water. Tourists keep coming, more and more, as if drawn to touch something about to disappear. They don't say it out loud, but they feel it. Charleston is living out its final days as an open-air museum. No walls, but no defenses either. Local government wrestles with tight budgets, unable to preserve heritage and fight flooding at the same time. Every dollar spent is a gamble. Save the old rooftops or build seawalls. The bitter truth is, whichever one they choose, the other will be lost. Charleston isn't screaming as it crumbles. It whispers its goodbye on nights of king tides, when the waves tap against the walls like a sad song. And if America doesn't act, then one day this city won't be destroyed by war or disaster. It'll dissolve into the sea like a beautiful story left unfinished. 8. Buffalo, New York. Buffalo, the city on Lake Erie. Once the industrial hope of the American Northeast, now dying quietly in a cold that's terrifying in its silence. This isn't the death of a sudden storm or an economic collapse. Buffalo is disappearing beneath the snow. Literally, blizzards here are no longer just weather. They're part of the city's identity, a slow sentence passed by the climate. When you live in a place where winter lasts 6 months, with snow so thick it buries cars, with winds cold enough to freeze power lines, you understand why people leave. not because they hate buffalo, but because human bodies and minds aren't built to fight the cold forever. And when those who can leave begin to go, a wave of population loss begins. Buffalo's economy has tried to recover many times, but how can it compete with warmer, easier cities when heating costs here eat up a fifth of a middle-class winter income? How do you keep young people when all they see each morning is gray skies, snow piles, and the silence of empty streets? Buffalo doesn't lack grit, but grit can't fix frozen roads, can't revive an economy when no one's investing. The cold here doesn't just freeze water, it freezes hope, and when hope stays frozen long enough, it doesn't thaw, it shatters. That's Buffalo today, a city not dead but no longer alive. A place slowly being erased from the nation's future, not because of visible failure, but because no one mentions it in plans for tomorrow. And so, Buffalo won't collapse with a bang. It will disappear in the snow, as if it was never there. 9. St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, the city on the Mississippi River, once the gateway to the West, once filled with ambition to open America's next frontier. But that westward dream has rotted, leaving behind a city drifting to the other side of history. Not with a bang, but with long, shameful decay. St. Louis was once a symbol of expansion, of post-war energy, of opportunity. Now it stands for what America tries hard to forget: crime, inequality, and the collapse of community trust. The murder rate here is among the highest in the nation, not because the people are more violent, but because the systems of policing, education, healthcare, and welfare have been chewed to the bone. As city budgets shrank, as neighborhoods were abandoned, as businesses fled, power vacuums were filled by gangs, drugs, and fear. The wealthy moved to gated suburbs, while the inner city became a gray zone. No one goes in, no one saves it. Racial division here is no longer history. It's a daily reality. Infrastructure is cracked. Schools are shut down. Public buildings stand like ruins. Federal officials once promised to revitalize St. Louis, but like many promises, it died on paper. And with each passing year, St. Louis doesn't fall because of a single event, but because no one is betting on it anymore. In the urban survival game, a city doesn't have to be attacked to vanish. It just has to be forgotten. And St. Louis is slowly fading from America's memory, like a smudge on the map of progress. No one wants to wipe it off, but no one wants to look either. The saddest part is, the place that was once the gateway to a dream is now the closing door of that very dream. No one wants to live where the dream has died. And St. Louis, with all its proud history, is becoming the bitter proof of that. 10. Honolulu, Hawaii. Honolulu, the capital of paradise, the symbol of Hawaii, a place once admired for its natural beauty and harmony between land and people. But Honolulu is quietly slipping from the present, not because of war or recession, but because of the very things that once made it so appealing: isolation, fragility, and near total dependence on tourism. As climate change raises sea levels inch by inch, the golden beaches once swarmed by tourists are being eaten away. Meter by meter, hour by hour, beachfront resorts no longer boast ocean views. They now discuss insurance risks. There's no mainland to retreat to. Honolulu can't expand. It can only shrink, but that's only part of the story. The greater threat isn't nature, it's dependence. This city survives on visitors, on mainland money, on supply chains stretching thousands of miles across the ocean. All it takes is a global economic shock, a pandemic, or a geopolitical disruption, and the entire foundation of Honolulu trembles. And when the economy shakes, young people have no reason to stay. More and more native Hawaiians are forced to leave because they can't afford the housing, the living costs, the price of paradise itself. They leave, taking with them the language, the culture, the soul of the islands. What's left are rows of short-term rentals, temporary residents, and a city losing its native identity. Honolulu may still have tourists, but eventually it may become nothing more than a beautiful stage with real props, but no actors. And the saddest part is, there will be no loud sound marking the end. Just one day, you'll return and find the place that once buzzed with life, now empty, no one greeting you with aloha anymore, no one telling you ancient stories. And you'll understand. Honolulu didn't vanish from war or disaster. It was erased by the cost of dependence, a death without pain, but also without rescue. And then, when we look back at the list of disappearing cities, New Orleans, Miami, Detroit, Las Vegas, San Francisco, Phoenix, Charleston, Buffalo, St. Louis, Honolulu, we're faced with a cold, undeniable truth. America is not just losing land, water, or people. It's losing its ability to defend its own future. Each city on this list is not just a geographic point in decline, but a snapshot of deeper contradictions within a superpower. Unsustainable development, visionless investment, prolonged inequality, and a governing system increasingly slow to respond to danger. The truth is, not all these cities will vanish in the literal sense, but many of them will cease to be themselves. Some will be erased from the tourist map. Some will no longer be livable. Some will become symbols of what America once had, but could not keep. The frightening part isn't how fast they disappear, but how quickly we accept it. When people get used to New Orleans flooding every season, used to Miami losing shoreline meter by meter, used to Detroit being a no-go zone, used to the lights of Vegas shining while Lake Mead hits bottom, then it's no longer a risk. It's a verdict that was signed long ago. No one wants to live in a city that's vanishing. But the heartbreaking thing is, no one wants to save it either. Not if the cost means changing what currently benefits the present, and that is the greatest paradox. People would rather let a place die slowly than give up short-term comfort. America can rebuild everything after a terrorist attack, can recover after a pandemic, can inject trillions into the economy, but it seems unable, or unwilling, to act fast enough to save the very cities being drowned by the era it helped create. And so this disappearance doesn't come from outside, but from within, not a death by assault, but by abandonment. Not because we are weak, but because we are proud. Not because we are poor, but because we are irresponsible. And that truly is the most terrifying kind of vanishing. And if there's one thing that chills me more than rising seas, more than deadly heat, more than snow so deep it buries entire seasons, it's the silence, a very American silence, not because they don't know. The scientific reports have been around for decades. The simulation models have long sounded alarms. The planners have rung the bells, but in the noise of the stock market, of election campaigns, of social media packed with empty chatter, the cries of these cities were swallowed whole, and slowly, as people became desensitized to warnings without immediate consequences, they began to assume it was someone else's problem. The government's, the future's, not mine, not now. And so, little by little, these cities sank, not under waves, but under indifference. What kills a civilization is not disaster, but the mindset that says, it probably won't happen to me. But history always collects on debts ignored. The cities we call early warnings today are really mirrors reflecting the future of us all. They show us what happens when growth isn't protected, when planning isn't fair, when power isn't responsible, and ultimately, when we live without thinking about how we'll continue to live. I don't write this to spread fear. I write it to remember that these cities existed, not just on maps, but in culture, in memory, in the daily lives of millions. And if we let them disappear in silence, then when our time comes, we'll vanish the same way, without a sound, with no one mourning, just a cold footnote in a government document, formerly inhabited area, and we'll scroll right past it as if nothing happened, as if loss itself is inevitable, and acceptance is the easiest option. But I don't choose easy, and I hope neither do you. Because when we choose inaction, we don't just lose a city. We lose our right to call ourselves caretakers of the legacy built by blood, sweat, and hope. Every brick in New Orleans is a song from the enslaved who still found the will to create jazz. Every beach in Miami was once the first step of a Cuban refugee rebuilding their life. Every factory in Detroit was the dream of the working class who believed in rising through their own hands. Every neon light in Vegas was a human illusion, a dream built in a place no one dared to live. Every winding road through San Francisco's hills, every historic home in Charleston, every power pole in Buffalo, every rental unit in Phoenix, every rusted gate in St. Louis, every sunbeam glinting off Black Rock in Honolulu, All of them once stood as proof of survival, ambition, and identity. And now, piece by piece, those legacies are decaying. Not from time, but because we let time steal them without trying to hold on. They say America is great because it always knows how to be reborn. But rebirth doesn't happen on its own. It takes courage. It takes decisions that please no one. It takes breaking the present to rescue the future. And tragically, in a country where politics are polarized, where noise is louder than reason, rebirth becomes a luxury. No one wants to be accountable for truth because truth doesn't win elections. And everyone keeps saying, there's still time. But no one says, I will act. If the death of a city doesn't make someone act, the next death will be the death of the nation itself. Because a city isn't just a place to live, it's how we understand who we are. An abandoned city isn't just lost property, it's a piece of soul pulled from the collective body. And when America loses its soul, piece by piece, can it still call itself a strong nation? This is no longer a question for the future, it is a question for now. And if the answer is silence, then silence is the one who killed every city on this list. Not the climate, not the economy, but the refusal to look in the mirror. And if you're still listening, treat this as a bell, not a death knell, but a wake-up call. Because history, if we don't rewrite it, will repeat. And next time, no one may be left to save us. Share this video if you believe what's happening is serious. Hit follow to explore more deep dive analyses like this, about things that seem distant but are closer than we think.